Mhm. Mhm.
Hello and welcome to Islamabad Policy Institute. I'm your guest moderator, Osama Nizamani, and today we're hosting our webinar on the abrogation of Article 370, evaluating its impact 5 years later. To speak on this, I'm joined by two esteemed panelists. I'm your guest moderator, Osama Nizamani, and today we're hosting our webinar on the abrogation of Article. Today I'm joined by two esteemed panelists. My first guest is Ambassador Abdul Basit, who served as Pakistan's ambassador in different capitals, including New Delhi, as well as in Berlin. My second panelist happens to be an esteemed member of the academia who happens to comment on defense and security-related matters. She's serving as an associate professor at the Department of Strategic Studies at the Quaid-e-Azam University. My second guest is Dr. Salma Malik. Now, before I go ahead and rope in my panelists, I will go ahead and request the Director of Research here at IPI to share her introductory remarks. Over to you, Huma.
Thank you, Osama. Distinguished speakers and online participants, Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon to you. It is a matter of great pleasure and privilege for Islamabad Policy Institute to have eminent speakers to discuss this significant issue of the Article 370 in Kashmir and its impact 5 years later. The international environment for strategic stability and regional dynamics is changing at a fast pace. This requires a fresh look at the dynamics and implications of increasingly fluid and unstable regional issues, such as the abrogation of Article 370, held in August 2019, which marked a significant shift in Jammu and Kashmir's political and social landscape. This constitutional amendment, which granted the region a special autonomous status, has had far-reaching implications for the region's governance, economy, the lives and choices of its people. In the aftermath of this decision, Jammu and Kashmir was reorganized into two separate union territories, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. This has resulted in a centralized administrative structure with the union government playing a more direct role in the region's affairs. Furthermore, even after 5 years, the security situation in the region has remained a complex and sensitive issue. The presence of a large military force and the continued threat of cross-border terrorism has led to a heightened sense of uncertainty and unease among the local population. In this backdrop, we hope to have fruitful but focused discussion on the reasons, rationale, and implications of the regional security dynamics of South Asia. I wish the participants a fruitful session of discussion and deliberations. Over to you, Sama.
Thank you. Now, I will go ahead and request Ambassador Abdul Basit to go ahead and share his insights. But before I do that, Ambassador Basit, I would like to start off with a question. While you will be speaking on the reasons and the rationale behind India's move 5 years earlier, in terms of abrogating Article 370 and 35A, we've seen the central government in New Delhi. It's actually touted the move in terms of as a sign which may have sort of like brought normalcy to the region. This is what the government over there had actually claimed. But my question is, despite the fact over here in Islamabad, it has never actually in the first place ever endorsed or approved of the Article 370 or 35A, let alone its revocation. So how much do you really see this overall claim in the last 5 years that the move has actually brought normalcy? Or do you think the direction or the movement has been downhill since then?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and thank you very much for having me. Since 5th August 2019, the implications are very clear. that first Pakistan, India are stuck in an impasse, and we do not, at least I do not see any off-ramp where the two countries could exit from the deadlock. Be that as it may, first let me dwell on the reasons, and the reasons for abrogating Article 370 and Article 35A. It is very clear that the BJP and overarching Sangh Parivar always saw the special status of occupied Jammu and Kashmir as aberrations. And they never kind of hid their desire to get rid of these two provisions or the special status of occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And this had always been in part of their election manifesto. But somehow they could never garner or muster a two-third majority, or did not have enough members in parliament to effect those amendments in the constitution. And when they got the opportunity, they did go ahead and abrogated the special status. I mean, if you look at their worldview, the worldview of BJP or the RSS, they had always opposed and always blamed the Congress party and its leadership for this kind of arrangement with occupied Jammu and Kashmir. But then fast forward from 1947 to 1994, the parliament adopted a resolution on 22nd of February, which clearly declared or reaffirmed that occupied Jammu and Kashmir was an integral part of India. So the BJP or the Sangh Parivar could see the contradiction. On the one hand, India would say that it was an integral part of India. On the other hand, they would always, be reminded of the UN Security Council resolutions, as well as other, for example, the bilateral agreement, Shimla Agreement of July 1972 between Pakistan and India. So they were never comfortable with this contradiction, and they thought that occupied Jammu and Kashmir was, we were seeing separatism there, in their words, and the reason to them was the special status, and they thought that unless and until we get rid of this, there was simply no possibility that India could really integrate the region with India into India, and unless that happened, they could not see real stability in that part of the country, according to their narrative. So in 2019, we all know that the BJP emerged as the largest party in Lok Sabha with 303 seats. And then they could effect those amendments, and they went ahead. More intriguing from our perspective was the removal of Article 35A, frankly speaking, because that was seen as an effort on the part of India, or the long-term plan on the part of India, to change the demography of occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and that should be worrying for us. Now, when we look back, 5th August 2019, the Indian narrative continues to be that things have improved. There is now the occupied Jammu and Kashmir is gradually returning to normalcy, and things, because they were able to hold G20 group meeting, and tourists are coming, visiting occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and so on and so forth. But in the process, if you look, they violated UN Security Council resolutions, no doubt. They violated the Shimla Agreement, no doubt. They violated the Lahore Declaration. And then more importantly, they also violated their own Supreme Court, which in its judgment in 2018 very clearly stated that Article 370 is now a permanent feature of the Indian Constitution. It could neither could it be changed nor taken out of the Constitution. So now we are in a kind of, in a cleft stick. And frankly speaking, when you look at Pakistan and India, we do not know how to get out of this situation. Unfortunately, Pakistan also, in different periods of time, did waffle when it came to Jammu and Kashmir. And India took full advantage of our situation as well, our wavering diplomacy on this issue over the years. And then today, the Indian narrative is obviously a false narrative. The is behind bars, and even Mir Wais, who is considered as a moderate Hurriyat leader, he is most of the time he is in house arrest. He is not even allowed to lead prayers, Jummah Friday prayers or Eid prayers. So things have not really improved. Otherwise, India would have would not have continued with more than 800,000 of its security forces in Jammu and Kashmir. If it had not continued with its repressive laws there, draconian laws, be it Public Safety Act or Disturbed Area Act or ESPA or UAPA, all these draconian acts are still in force in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And rather than demilitarizing the region, they are reinforcing their security forces in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So I'm somewhat, do not subscribe to the Indian narrative that things have improved. In such struggles, we do see ups and downs. They do not really go linearly. There are always ups and downs in such movements. So if you ask the people, Kashmiris, whether they are in occupied Jammu and Kashmir or Kashmiri diaspora, they're still very confident that though they have suffered a setback, but that is not permanent. Their struggle would come back. They would reorganize themselves politically and otherwise, and would be able to put pressure on the Indian government. But now, in my personal view, now that constitutional amendments have been made and the Supreme Court of India has also put its stamp on it, I do not know as to how Pakistan can really talk to India and India can oblige Pakistan on Jammu and Kashmir. Things have become really complicated constitutionally, legally. Now we are hearing voices in Pakistan as well that it is high time for Pakistan to follow suit. And we hear these voices, particularly in the context of Gilgit-Baltistan, and some voices in Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Though Azad Jammu and Kashmir is slightly different because they're more conscious about their right to self-determination, and they are not yet ready to give up their option. Rather, we are hearing voices of it for the third option, and that again, in my view, is misplaced. So now people are talking about revisiting here in Islamabad to revisit our policy, which was announced on 7th of August to resume trade with India, upgrade our diplomatic relations, and so on and so forth. I am not sure about these things. Yes, we can always go ahead and upgrade our relations, but my advice to my government would be that this is not the time to engage with India in a formal structural dialogue. We must show patience and perseverance. First of all, we need to be very clear as to what our bottom lines are, what we would like to achieve in the longer term. If there are changes in our Kashmir policy, in our India policy, then we need to act accordingly. But as far as my information goes, there is at present no change as such in our Kashmir policy. So if that is the case, then Pakistan needs to show strategic perseverance and tactical strategic patience and tactical prudence, in my view, because we can always engage with India, but that engagement should be on the back channel, off stage, and that, in my view, is the right way forward. Should we decide to engage with India in a formal dialogue, we would keep on wrestling as to what should be the framework for our dialogue. And the framework which was last agreed upon between the two countries was in Islamabad in 2015. To my mind, that framework was flawed to begin with, and Pakistan should not go back to that dialogue framework. So Pakistan needs to be creative, innovative. Kashmiris are still not reconciled, have not reconciled with the idea of giving up their right to self-determination. So I'm confident that if Pakistan plays its cards smartly, we can still make a difference. So I will conclude here and see how the deliberations proceed. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Ambassador Abdul Basit. You certainly suggested that the situation has become complicated. On that note, I'll go ahead and actually rope in our other esteemed panelist, Dr. Salma Malik. Dr. Salma Malik, just a question to start off with. I mean, what we actually see in the IOJK, how do you really actually see the political landscape has changed in these last 5 years? And particularly, on one hand, you actually see a lot of despair existing out over there, but then at the same time, people often express their frustration even when New Delhi is holding elections over there. And as the media has also reported in the recent elections for Lok Sabha that were held over there, they reported that the turnout was around 58%, and the trend was quite markedly against the central government in New Delhi itself. So how do you really see those developments on one hand, and more importantly, the way that the political landscape has actually changed since 2019? How do you actually really see impacting the overall region, particularly the subcontinent? Dr. Salma, over to you.
Sir, walaikum salam. Okay.
Dr. Salma, over to you. I
Okay.
hope I'm audible.
Okay, she's coming back. Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Salma, we have you connected now.
You are connected, but we can't hear you. We can't hear you. I guess your mic is mute. Now you're back. Okay.
Yeah, we can see you, Dr. Salma. I'll just request you if you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Right. Thank you so much. My apologies. There was a glitch in the Zoom connection. Today is very significant for 3 reasons. I mean, the day 13th of August, it also happens to be the 76th anniversary of the resolution that was passed by the UN Commission on India and Pakistan, which both India and Pakistan had actually agreed. And interestingly, holding a seminar on Kashmir and talking about the Yom Istehsal as we commemorate this day for what India did unilaterally, this is something that India has been doing forever. And this is pretty unfortunate because when we look at Pakistan, there are 2 aspects. Number one, Pakistan is bound and it respects and it follows to the letter the UN Security Council resolutions. And owing to that, because Pakistan honors and respects the UN Security Council resolutions that have been passed on Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, what we then see is that India uses this particular space to carry out whatever unilateral actions that it has to carry. When we look at the decades prior to the 1970s, we had this notion where India was, the 1965 war happened, and prior to that, the 48 war happened. There were several UN Security Council resolutions on this particular issue. And by 1971, once the Pakistan-India war took place and the Shimla Agreement of 72 happened, then we actually see that India's manipulative nature, which was very clear from day one, becomes all the more clear because what had been agreed at the Shimla was not how India sold it to its own country people, and also to the rest of the world. If anyone reads the Shimla Accord in true letters and spirits, we would then find out that what Shimla Accord basically says is that nothing would supersede the UN resolutions or UN's decision on this particular contentious issue. And Kashmir, including all other contentious problems, would be discussed at all levels, including the bilateral level. And this did not mean that it's solely and only going to be discussed at the bilateral level, but India willfully interpreted this particular aspect in its own design. Pakistan, owing to its own civil-military problematic dynamics at that time, did not really look into the lawfaring aspect of this problem, something that we talk about a lot nowadays, which is very important that we should. And as a result of that, we somehow lost that public debate and space on Kashmir as early as the 1970s. And then, of course, several things happened. One would talk about Kashmir. We would not talk about, there were several dynamics happening. Pakistan went nuclear. And that added that additional iron fist that Pakistan had in order to carry out what it needs to do. But unfortunately, what we have seen is that even under the nuclear umbrella, there is ample space for belligerents to exploit and do whatever they need to do. And that is precisely what India has done. In any conversation that we have with our Indian interlocutors, they very conveniently say, whatever we have done, we did Pulwama, we had that Brahmos incident, and which is not related to Kashmir, but I'm just using this example. What would you do? Would you strike us back with a nuclear weapon? And then you try, and of course, you then tell them that sanity demands that we do not revert back to nuclear weapons. But this is how India has been acting, and this is what they primarily do. And that's the impunity that everyone talks about and everyone is bothered about, that India has this aspect of using impunity and they use whatever they need to. But for the average Kashmiri, every day under the Indian occupation, the Kashmiri of the Valley, the Kashmiri of Jammu, Kashmiri residing in Ladakh, whose number is squarely dwindling, as Ambassador Basit has pointed out, that what is more upsetting and problematic is the fact that there is immense amount of demographic shifting that is being taken place since 2020, when India went unilateral in doing what it had to do in Kashmir. And this is something that we really need to realize, because this is giving a lot of disadvantage to the average Kashmiri, because every day under the Indian occupation means that 100+ people are being turned out of their homeland, are being turned out of their motherland. They're losing their livelihood, they're losing their lives, they're losing their human rights. There is no respect for human rights. And there is this massive blackout of information or any kind of access, especially to the valley. I mean, we have also seen Kashmir is making these big headlines in comparison in terms of having the longest standing curfew in any country. Besides Palestine, Kashmir is one of the longest standing issues on the UN table. So, I mean, these are not statistics that one should proudly rattle off, but the very fact is that this kind of signifies the type of impunity that India enjoys, and the type of apathy that the international order has towards a genuine human rights issue. Now, what we see here is that not only, as I mentioned, there's a human rights violation taking place, again, because of the media blackout, both within India, outside India. India has been very smart in inculcating immense amount of international press to its favor. Fake news, deep fake, genuine news channels, they're all being fed by the Indian money. And that is something that we need to really look at, because every day when Pakistanis or Kashmiri nationals try to pitch the case for Kashmir at any international consortium, at any international forum, unfortunately, what happens is that they have Indian lobbyists who are doing the work for the government. India has the type of money. We have seen, we have talked about it. Your forum has talked about it. And that makes things very difficult for Pakistan to pitch its case properly. And the very reason as to why we could not have a resolution in the last 5 years, we have had UN Security Council meetings, closed door meetings, strong deliberations, strong words, sincere words being stated, but that does not tantamount to the type of help Kashmir requires at the moment. But even if there was a UN resolution, because there's many times there is a lot of discussion back home, and there's a lot of criticism that Pakistan could not manage to get a UN resolution. Even if we had 5 resolutions each year, or 10 resolutions each year, would that have changed the fate for the Kashmiris? Because India remains stubbornly unilateralist when it comes to Kashmir, and when it comes to all of these notions. Besides the human rights violation, we also need to see that this is a very concerted effort by India to gradually, systematically wipe out the indigenous and ethnic indigenous Kashmiri population. And not only are they turning people out of Kashmir, they're of course killing them with impunity. That is the work of the security forces. They're economically depriving people, and as a result, people are forced to leave their homelands. Then, of course, they're under the pretext of providing rights to the women. They have, as a virtue of abrogation of 35A and 370, especially 35A, after eradicating Kashmir's special status, they have made the land of Kashmir open to any and every national of India. And for many of these people, where Kashmir looks like a manna, it looks like a heaven sent opportunity. So people are heavily investing there. And of course, when the statistics the Indian government wants to show to the world, then you can see the type of investment that is pouring in Kashmir. And that is not a Kashmir friendly investment, that is a Delhi friendly investment. And that is primarily garnered to change the overall flavor of Kashmir. A third thing that we also need to see is that there is not only economic and political genocide taking place, there's a cultural genocide also taking place, where you have the dargahs, you have the mosques, old traditional mosques and dargahs, which are being targeted. Suddenly someone would go and they would put the saffron, sprinkle saffron or the vermilion, and they say that this used to be a Ram Mandir, or this Devi's Mandir, or that Devta's Mandir. And as a result of that, those mosques, those dargahs, which they know are absolutely Muslim spaces, and even if they were not Muslim spaces, in the old Kashmiri flavor, the Kashmiriyat held true, and it was a common space for everyone. It was not owned by anyone. But those dargah and those mosques are purely Muslim spaces. Since centuries, these are being razed to the ground, and slowly and gradually, Kashmir's indigenous culture is dying its death. The Vazwan, everything, they are changing the local flavor. So there's not only that in the phase type of transformation, a negative transformation that is taking place in Kashmir, there's also a very subtle, deep rooted, grassroots transformation, which is going to be far more damaging than otherwise. But having said that, what is Pakistan's response? What are we doing? There is unilateralism. There is also, we talk a lot about the gasification of Kashmir. We talk about Palestinization of Kashmir. These are terminologies which have become part and parcel of the lexicon since the 2020s. But unfortunately, Pakistan's policy by and large has been reactive. One factor that I mentioned was that Pakistan has deep faith in the institution of the UN, that it does not want to violate UN's resolution. And the reason as to why Pakistan also does not want to unilaterally, quote unquote, change the status of Gilgit-Baltistan or Azad Jammu and Kashmir and do a tit for tat would be problematic because A, that would kind of seal the fate for the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmiris, but also the fact that it would be in violation of Pakistan's long-standing commitment to the UN process and to the UN resolutions, despite the fact that the UN resolutions haven't really brought about the type of positive change that should be there. But at the same time, we need to have a multi-sectoral approach. The flavor of the month is lawfaring. So there has to be a lot of lawfaring activity. We need to build a very solid, logical, evidence-based legal case for the Kashmiris. And it is not that if we don't have access to Kashmir, that means that we do not have any information and there can't be any cases made. Look back at the various episodes of Kashmir where gross human rights violations have taken place, the pellet gun incidents, the rape of women in several villages of Kashmir, the widow villages that there are people who have given evidence. And fascinatingly, it is not that the entire India is unanimously standing with Modi. There has been a sizable Indian civil society which has actually documented evidence of this impunity of women being raped, women being humiliated, people being turned out of their homes, their livelihoods being snatched from this. The incident of chasing of President Clinton's visit has been documented by Pankaj Mishra, of all the people. And there are several incidents, the falsification that the Modi government brings to the picture. And there can be lawsuits being filed at international courts and several acts get done. Pakistan needs to be proactive at this level and several other levels. And of course, there are people who are crossing border to save their lives and coming to Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Their evidences can be calculated and that can be used. So those factors are there. We have to also look at how this issue is politically looked into. And as Ambassador Bassett mentioned, that there is no political appetite, especially in India, for the settlement of Jammu and Kashmir. But we have to keep on doing this. The special envoys, the committees, they need to be more proactive. But one very important thing that we need to actually look at is the internal level, the internal dynamics. And we look at the internal dynamics. Unfortunately, me myself being a teacher, I usually see that the students, those of me have but just fixation. What the and why the mountain war taking place? I would say that what India has done is absolutely incorrect. Why do we condemn the Maharaja's actions? All of these have a very, very strong logic and a very deep truth and a very strong truths behind it. But
Dr. Salma, I hope I fear I have lost you over there. If you're still with
yeah,
us, I'd like you
so
to.
yeah, at the end, I would sorry, just give me a minute.
Not at all.
Yes.
Sorry.
So
So
at
at
the
the
end,
end, I would basically say that what we need to do on Kashmir primarily is that have a policy which is not reactive, have a policy that actually speaks about Pakistan's version on Kashmir, have a policy that speaks about the Kashmiris, what the Kashmiris want. Let's not have a policy that looks like a reaction to India, which does not take into account the aspirations of the Kashmiris. And we have to also look at the factor that we have China as a very proactive element in the overall Kashmir story. How do we garner and how do we actually bring together our strengths and then plead the case of Kashmir and figure out what's the best way out for the Kashmiris to perform? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salma. On that note, I will go ahead and open Ambassador Abdul Basit. Ambassador Basit, we've actually come across, people often speak about the fact that if India were to go ahead and basically restore in some form the statehood of the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, then such an outcome might actually be acceptable to Pakistan. But actually, there lies a caveat. Whenever such proposals actually do come up, there is no talk of the fact that how India will go ahead and, ensure the protection of the demography of the IOJK and its people. So do you think a restoration of the statehood alone would be something that might be acceptable to Pakistan to go ahead and, resume normalcy between India and Pakistan?
Sarah, but that amounts to hoodwinking ourselves because on the 4th of August 2019, Home Minister Amit Shah has said on record in Lok Sabha that they would restore the status hood of occupied Jammu and Kashmir as and when feasible. So that would hardly be a concession to Pakistan, and then or on the Kashmir issue as such. And then secondly, the Indian Supreme Court, in its judgment of December last year, very clearly directed the union government to restore the statehood of the state, occupied state, by September this year. So I do not know how can we explain that as a kind of flexibility on the part of India to engage Pakistan. But if the statehood is restored without Ladakh, that again is not really enough. From purely diplomatic point of view, as to how to break the current gridlock, we need to, first of all, as I said in my introductory remarks, we need to be very, very clear as to what our long-term objectives are. Because, during the time of President Pervez Musharraf, we even abandoned our stated policy vis-a-vis the UN Security Council resolutions, and both the countries had been discussing the 4-point formula for almost 4 years, though it could not really realize the objective. But in any case, we need to be very careful. This, in any case, would come, whether Pakistan engages with India or not. I'm not against engagement, because in diplomacy, you may close the door, but you keep the windows open at least, for some kind of communications to continue. But in this case, as I underscored, we should not be engaging with India formally. We need to engage informally with India in order to see as to what are the possibilities. Because if we get too much involved into kind of, fixated with the formal engagement or with the dialogue process with India, my fear is that he would lose more ground on Kashmir rather than achieving anything substantive.
Right. And Dr. Salman, let me rope you in over here, with another question that has to do with the political landscape in IOJK. The Indian Supreme Court had actually directed last year to the Indian government to hold elections by the 30th of September this year. You also had the Chief Election Commissioner of India actually visit Srinagar as well. And despite the fact that India has still yet to give out some kind of a date in terms of, when they might be actually, holding the elections over there. Do you think the ongoing wave of violence, in the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, will actually permit such an election to actually take place on time? And even if they are held, do you think it is likely to change anything substantively on the ground for the people in Jammu and Kashmir and also for people in Ladakh?
Thank you, Sama. Well, actually, I would go in reverse. In entire probability, Modi would try and have the elections by the 30th of September. He is good with these things. He tries to make things look quite iconic, and he's symbolic about the dates and several other things. But at the same time, the people who would or whom he plans to get elected are not exactly in the same strength or in the same electoral comfort that they were in the previous elections. And we have seen that in the state elections, the larger General Assembly's elections that took place, how a lot of Modi's favorite legislators were not able to perform very well. We need to understand the local dynamics of Kashmir, how the Gujars, the Paharis, the other people, how they perform, what type of constituencies are being created or recreated, and how these dynamics are unfolding. We also need to see that as conflict becomes deeper and it becomes more internalized, many of those traditional constituencies, which were the vote catchers, would not remain so strong, and that we have seen in the previous election dynamics. And this is going to heavily reflect on how the state elections are actually going to impact the overall political condition in Jammu and Kashmir, as well as Ladakh. So let's see how it happens. India knows how to bring down the violence level. To them, killing several thousands of Kashmiri youth is no big deal. That actually makes the things pretty easy for them. They're in any case quite wary of Muslims being in a greater population number. So they kill a couple of people and they have their ghost votes into this assembly legislation. So that would happen. And that's another way of engendering demographic changes. And they would willfully do whatever they need to do. And that is something very, very alarming.
And, I have a mutual question for both of you, Dr. Salma and Ambassador Abdul Basit. Speaking of, or perhaps taking a more regional picture of South Asia itself, over the last few years, we've seen, curbs taking place on expression of political freedom across South Asia itself. But when we actually look at Jammu and Kashmir as a disputed territory, ever since August 5th of 2019, we've seen unprecedented restrictions on expression of, political rights, freedom of expression, journalists not being able to actually do their fundamental job itself. So with, curbs on these universal rights itself, what do you think can people, inside IOJK can actually do, and people outside or the international community can really do in order to basically help bring about some kind of normalcy for the people over there to exercise their, universal fundamental rights. Ambassador Bassett, if we can have you go first up on this.
Yeah, fundamental human rights is an interesting subject, but when it comes to occupied Jammu and Kashmir, obviously it's not things are not really normal there, and unless and until India takes a decisive decision about its future, I do not really think that things can improve on the ground. Hence, all the more reason for Pakistan to inject some verve into its Kashmir diplomacy. Also for the international community and especially organizations such as International Amnesty or Human Rights Watch, for that matter, Human Rights Commissioner as well, UN Human Rights Commissioner as well, to keep highlighting these things. And everything, as a matter of fact, is documented. Unfortunately, we have not been able to reach out to civil societies around the world. We have not been able to mobilize Kashmiri Pakistani diaspora in this context. So Pakistan does have, we do have tools available, but unfortunately, we have not been able to highlight what is happening inside occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Unless and until we have a kind of sustained diplomatic effort and stop, working in fits and starts, I'm afraid we would not be able to bring about any tangible difference or make a tangible difference on the ground. It is now left for Kashmiris as to how they carry forward their struggle. They are up against heaviest of odds, and one must appreciate their situation as well. But I'm sure such struggles do find ways, and Kashmiris too would find ways to get to grips with this situation and overcome and raise their voice loud enough to be heard around the world. So I, frankly speaking, do not have any concrete proposal to make in this behalf. But my own feeling is that Pakistan needs to do its homework as to how we can have a kind of laser focus on Kashmir. We need to not to really, move out of this kind of tentative steps we take here and there. It is time to have a holistic, well-knit, well-calibrated Kashmir strategy, and then have clear-cut objectives in view, and then pursue those objectives in a coordinated, well-calibrated manner. And I'm afraid I do not see that political will, frankly speaking, because the steps that Pakistan can easily take on its own, even we are reluctant to take those steps to highlight the problem of the Kashmir dispute around the world. So we do have limitations, unfortunately, and it is now left for Kashmiris to see as to how they can create awareness around the world what is happening in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The first thing would be that the UN Human Rights Commissioner be allowed or comes to Azad Jammu and Kashmir, because Pakistan, first of all, needs to be feel very confident about its own policies. Over the years, I have seen that even that has been kind of weakened over the years. So Pakistan needs to be very confident. We have a very strong case, and Pakistan is one of the main stakeholders. So despite all these restrictions on or in Jammu and in occupied Jammu and Kashmir, I think Pakistan, we can still do much better, provided we know what we are trying to achieve. Thank you.
And so, Dr. Salma, what would your thoughts be on the very same question?
I can simply say I absolutely agree with everything that Dr. Ambassador Basit has said, and that's about it. But I totally agree. What he has said is very, very important, and we really need to look at the depth of the problem that he has highlighted. There are several factors attached to this particular notion, especially the media strategy. You see, and even this is a state perspective, we look at this problem as an India-Pakistan binary. We need to also realize that there's a very important third actor about whom we are planning to decide, and that is Kashmir. And in these 1970, in these 70 plus decades, the Kashmiris who once were a subject of the Maharaja have now, after suffering so long at the hands of the Indians, created a very strong voice of themselves. Several Atharzia, various people, young ladies, young men who have lived there, who are brought up there, and because of the compulsions, because of being for the fear of persecution, they have left their homelands and they're residing abroad. Or doing work that we usually look at what Arundhati Roy has written and we feel, oh, this is so great. But can we afford an Arundhati Roy at our end as well? So these are questions we need to ask, and that's what is India doing? India has control of Kashmir. India has very effectively carried out a media blackout on Kashmir. India has used any of its external media channels and stakeholders worldwide to only and only spread its perspective and cull any other perspective that comes from time to time. India has very effectively, because of having this heavy-handedness, a heavy-handed approach, managed to somewhat neutralize very genuine, very strong indigenous Kashmiri voices which are residing in various world capitals, and tried to delegitimize them, tried to falsify what they were saying, and so on and so forth. Yet the very fact is that, having said that, and of course, there's also the very, very important Bollywood effect that India uses effectively to kind of spread its narrative. But even having said that, you have the Kashmiris saying and doing what they need to say. Ghulam Nabi Fai being one of those people, and several other people who are doing a great job for their country and for their people. What Pakistan needs to do? Pakistan, number one, a very big question is we have to bring our home in order. We have to be very strong to become that attractive magnet for the Kashmiris to come to us and to think that we are the strongest alternative for them. And their decision in 1947 was the right decision, and there should be no second thinking about it. Second thing that we need to do is we need to understand Kashmir in entirety, and then develop a discourse which is very well-informed, evidence-based, and it speaks when it is required. And when we take that evidence-based, strong discourse to any of the world capitals, it would actually carry a lot of weight, and it will carry a lot of clout to it. We have Kashmir committees, but they haven't really done the type of job that was expected of them. So we have to be a little introspective. Also, currently the Jammu incident that has taken place, previously Amarnath Yatra had happened. None of these things were documented in Pakistan to its advantage and carry the message to the world. So we really need to understand the internal dynamics of Kashmir and plead the case properly.
Now, my panel, before I come forward with the last question, I'll go ahead and request Huma to go ahead and table her question to the panel.
Thank you, Osama. Like, I have a question, very interesting, insightful comments, and personal experiences, like we heard from you, Ambassador Basit and Dr. Salma, by your expertise. I have a question, like similar question, I got it from the online, our participants as well. Since Dr. Salma, you are an expert on war and crises and that kind of all the assessments and the regional and security dynamics, the question here is that, do you think that in view of this Article 370 revocation, the legislative step unilaterally taken by the India ruled out the but you can say chances of military solution to a disputed or a claimed territory? For instance, like you see the same claims and the military situation in Gaza, or you can also say that in Ukraine. I won't say that they are similar, but there is a question that, do you see a different kind of scenario for a military chances in future? Or is it a different game scenario? Like it will only be solved through the legislative, like UN forums, or by the dialogues, and as suggested by the Ambassador Basit Saab to think about the renewed policy. So please.
Thank you so much, Uma. I think that's a very, very alarming question, a very important question, yet alarming at the same time. You see, Kashmir is at war. It's in a perpetual state of war. Every day, the average Kashmiri youth who steps out of her house, they fight a war to reach their end destination, whether it be a hospital, whether it be a school, college, university, if they're allowed to go there, access to hospitals, access to food. So they're at a war. And I recall one of my young Kashmiri colleagues at a forum where we both were attending, Humayun and I, who said that we'll fight Kashmir to the last Kashmiri. And rest be assured, even if there's no one standing with us. So they're very resolute about their homeland, and they will keep on fighting in whatever terms, kinetic, non-kinetic terms, for their homeland. So there is one, which is the internal war, which is perpetually taking place since ever. The second aspect that you have asked about a cross-border, full-term kinetic engagement, Pakistan can do it. Pakistan can do it at any time. It could have done in 2019. Why don't we do it? Because on both sides of the divide, it's the Muslim population which is sitting there. And India has nothing to lose. It would only be the Muslims of Azad Jammu and Kashmir and the Muslims of illegally occupied Indian Jammu and Kashmir who would suffer. So on both sides, Pakistan ends up having a heartache for the loss of better word. So that is one aspect. Number two, you talk about the legislative thing. It is not a legally sanctified action that India has taken. It is a unilateral action that it has taken. It's in violation of the UN Security Council resolutions, which absolutely umbrella the entire Jammu and Kashmir question. We can argue this to any amount, and that would be a very logical, emotional argument that what have the UN resolutions done for the Palestinians, and what have they served to the Kashmiris. But at the legal level, this is an illegal action that India has undertaken. Pakistan could have initiated a kinetic response, but what would have that resulted in? Having a mad person sitting on the other side of the border in New Delhi, who is a frenzied saffron person, he would have actually initiated a world war. He would have initiated a small-scale nuclear war. Because in his ego to show that he owns the world, he could do anything. And the bigger question that we are not actually addressing is also the fact that why India is doing everything with impunity is also the fact that India has a blanket approval and support by the international community, especially the US, as a proxy in this region, and that allows India to do anything under the sun. And no one wants to touch India because India is supposed to do the security subletting for them, which it will never do when it comes to the question. And that is why they don't want to really shake the boat beyond a certain point. So it would only be routine condemnation from resolution to management to condemnation, and that's about it. And unfortunately, Pakistan, even if there's a very strong temptation for going for an all out kinetic response, would always remain restrained. Hopefully.
And Ambassador Basit, if I could rope you in for the final comment over here. How do you really see, India's revocation of the Article 370? Does it really change the status of, the disputed Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, given the fact that we have had so many international UN, backed resolutions on this dispute? Does it in any way dilute the status of those resolutions?
It does not. If you look at it from purely from a legal point of view, international law point of view, it does not. Because there are several UN Security Council resolutions and there are bilateral agreements between Pakistan and India, particularly the Shimla Agreement of 1972, where the two sides very clearly committed that they would not really change anything on the ground unilaterally. But I must hasten to add that India amended its constitution. And though that was again done unconstitutionally, illegally, against Article 3 of their own constitution, against sub-Article 2 of 370 of their constitution, and so on and so forth. But now it's a fait accompli which has been given to us, because no party, whether it is Congress or any other party which comes to power, let's say 5 years hence or 10 years hence, would be able to reverse these amendments. So we are in a kind of cul-de-sac. Now it is for Pakistan to realistically reflect on these developments. It is one thing that in the public domain we say that we can't accept this. UN resolutions are still relevant. But as we had seen in the past too, Pakistan had exhibited flexibility in the shape of 4-point formula. So, and I remember having discussed this with the National Security Advisor of India, Mr. Ajit Doval, at one point in time when I was in India. So even then, they were not very enthusiastic about reopening President Pervez Musharraf's 4-point formula. So they were very clear as to what they would eventually, what their course of action would be. So my terse response to your question would be that we can always, we can continue talking about UN Security Council resolutions. And from a purely legal point of view, international law point of view, while it has not changed anything on the ground, but we have to accept the reality, what happened on the 5th of August. As a former diplomat, I really do not see as to how, unless, we are able to build so much pressure on India from within occupied Jammu and Kashmir, that would be a different story then. Things may pan out differently. But unfortunately, I'm not seeing that desire in Islamabad. On the one hand, India had abrogated Article 370. On the other hand, Pakistan had signed the ceasefire agreement on the line of control in February 2021. So these are the contradictions which kind of, India gained ground on the Kashmir dispute. So I'm not really very optimistic, frankly speaking. I may sound out of touch with reality, but I think I may not be in sync with what our national policy is or the rhetoric is, but I am kind of being more realistic. And if at all Pakistan wants to settle this issue once and for all, I'm not suggesting for a moment that we concede to India in any manner. But I think Pakistan needs to be realistic in its policy calculations. Only then can we expect to achieve tangible good results. Otherwise, we will keep on moving from like a pendulum from one end to another end without really achieving anything tangible and substantive. And then, as Dr. Salma Malik very rightly underlined, Kashmiris are the primary stakeholders in this dispute. No doubt, Pakistan committed a number of faux pas in the last decades, but Kashmiris should not be made to suffer because of our diplomatic omissions or commissions. Their right to self-determination, no doubt, is inherent, is inalienable. But at the same time, I think Kashmiris too are realistic about what the situation has come about since 5th August 2019. So I think this would warrant, as I emphasized earlier, a holistic review of the entire situation, both internal, external, kinetic, non-kinetic, and everything. And then we can come up with policy options. But as of today, I would strongly suggest that Pakistan needs to continue saying that these are unacceptable to us, because the countries, the states should not be showing any flexibility publicly, especially on such issues. We can always exhibit flexibility at the negotiating table, but in the public domain, Pakistan needs to be absolutely continue adhering to its stated position. So let's hope that things will get better, and through, we may have some diplomatic tricks which I'm not aware of, and things may change for something better to come. But let's see, because frankly speaking, at this point in time, I do not see any political will. I mean, we do mark different days, 27th October or 5th August or 5th February. But beyond that, I do not see any strategy. So let's hope that we realize that before it is too late.
On that note, thank you so very much, Ambassador Abdul Basit and Dr. Salma. It's been an extremely useful session, having solicited all these inputs from both of you on such an important topic to the region and the international community. Having said that, I think you can tune in to this conversation once again on YouTube. And I'm also grateful to all the people that have tuned in and listened to this conversation on YouTube as well. Thank you once again, and wishing you all a good rest of the day.
Thank you.